Yes, of course. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, for the invitation. So I start. During the history of collecting and exhibiting art, museums and private collections have been subjected to the same kind of critique. They have been accused of selectivity and imposing the personal taste of curators on the general public. There has been a struggle for the democratization of art, for more inclusivity. However, today, the struggle seems to have reached its endpoint and lost its relevance. The reason for this is a new technology of the image display, the emergence of the internet. The internet has no curators. Everyone can use a photo or video camera to produce images, a text processing program to add commentaries, and the World Wide Web to distribute the results on a global scale, avoiding any kind of censorship or selection process. Thus, at the first glance, the internet seems to be the end of all selectivity. In practice, however, the internet leads not to the emergence of a universal public space, but to the tribalization of the public. The internet is an extremely narcissistic medium. It is a mirror of our specific interests and desires. It functions by reacting to our clicks. If we click on a certain site, it appears. If we don't, it remains concealed. The internet shows us what we want to see and does not show us what we do not want to see. In the context of the internet, we communicate only with the people who share our interests and attitudes, whether political or aesthetic. Thus, the non-selective character of the internet is an illusion. The factual functioning of the internet is based on the non-explicit rules of selection, according to which users select only what they already know or are familiar with. Of course, some search engines are able to comb the entire internet, but these programs are controlled by big corporations and not by individual users. For individual users, the internet is the opposite of, say, an urban space, where we permanently have to see what we do not necessarily want to see. In many cases, we try to ignore these unwanted images and impressions. In other cases, they provoke our interest, but in any case, they expand our field of experience. The same can be said about exhibitions in the museums and other art spaces. The curatorial choices let us see what we would not necessarily choose to see, what is even unknown to us. Being a public institution, the museum, if it is properly functioning, tries to transcend the fragmentation of the public space and create a universal space of representation that the internet is incapable of creating. Art exhibitions are interesting and relevant, where the contents are selected from different parts of the world or from different fragments of the internet as social networks. The same can be said about the museum and private collections. The operation of collecting and exhibiting, which moves things from the original context to the artificial space of a collection, has often been criticized as undermining their originality and thus their meaning. The meaning that they can allegedly manifest only in the context in which they were initially created. Let us consider some prominent examples of such a critique. In his essay Das Kunstwerk im Zeitalter seiner technischen Reproduzierbarkeit, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, Walter Benjamin famously defines the exhibition value of the artwork as an effect of the reproducibility of art. Both reproduction and exhibition are operations that remove the artwork from its historical place, from its here and now, ascended into global circulation. Benjamin believes that as a result of these operations, the artwork loses its cult value, its place in ritual and tradition, and hence its aura. Here, aura is understood precisely as inscription of the artwork in its original historical context. Being isolated from its original environment, the artwork remains materially self-identical, but loses its historical place and thus its truth. In a similar way, Martin Heidegger writes in the Ursprung des Kunstwerks, The Origin of the Work of Art. I quote, "When a work is brought into a collection or placed in an exhibition, we say that is set up. But the setting up differs essentially from setting up as in erecting a building, raising a statue, presenting a tragedy at a holy festival." End of quotation. In other words, Heidegger differentiates between an artwork that is inscribed into a certain historical space and time, and an artwork that is merely exhibited in a particular location, but could be removed at any given moment, and thus becomes contextless, wordless. But why can an artwork have an aura only in its immediate local historical context? It's specific here and now. Why is it impossible to determine its place in the global world? According to Heidegger, the production of the world images or world views, as he calls them, is based on an ontological fallacy. Man imagines himself to be a subject to whom the world presents itself as an object, an image. However, this illusion is not accidental. It is based on the specific positioning of man in the modern world. This positioning is defined by modern technology. Modern technology creates a framing or apparatus that allows man to position himself as a subject vis-à-vis the world. However, as Heidegger says, this apparatus remains concealed from us, precisely because it opens the world to our gaze. This is our very positioning vis-à-vis the internet. On the screens of our computers, we see its surface, while its apparatus remains hidden from us as users. We cannot follow the supply of electricity that is a medium of the internet. Most of us do not have enough knowledge to understand the functioning of the internet's hardware and software. And most importantly, we do not grasp the working of the algorithm that brings certain information to our attention and make another information too difficult to reach. In other words, even if we rightly assume that the apparatus of the internet is selective and manipulative, we have no insight into the structure and workings of this apparatus. That is why our time is also a time of the flourishing of conspiracy theories. However, the art exhibition not only presents some images to our gaze, but also demonstrates the inner apparatus of their presenting, the mode in which our gaze is determined, oriented, and manipulated. The exhibition is not merely selective, it exhibits its own selectivity. The exhibition exhibits itself before it exhibits anything else. That is the main difference between the exhibition and the internet. The internet conceals the apparatus of presenting the images that the exhibition reveals. Indeed, when we visit an exhibition, we do not only look at the exhibited images or objects, but also reflect on the spatial and temporal relationships among them, the hierarchies, the curatorial choices and strategies that produce this exhibition. The worldview is a technologically created illusion, but the exhibition shows precisely how this illusion is produced and presented. In this way, the exhibition is able to reveal the apparatus that defines our positioning in the world. In an exhibition, the individual items are removed from the original context and put into an artificial context, in which images and objects meet that could never have met historically in real life. In the context of this exhibition, we can see, for example, Egyptian gods besides Mexican or Inca gods in combination with the utopian dreams of the avant-garde that were never realized in real life. This removals from the original context and positionings in a new context implicates application of violence, including economic and direct military violence. Thus, art collections and exhibitions demonstrate the orders, laws, and trade practices that regulate our world, as well as ruptures to which these orders are subjected: wars, revolutions, crimes. These orders cannot be seen, but they can be and are manifested in the organization of the exhibition in a way in which art is framed. As visitors, we are not only outside, but also inside this frame. We are exhibited through the exhibition to ourselves and to others. That is why the exhibition is not an object, but an event. In other words, the aura of an artwork does not simply get lost when this artwork is removed from its original local context. Every artwork becomes recontextualized and attains a new here and now in the event of an exhibition, and thus in the history of exhibitions in general. Being an event, an exhibition cannot be reproduced. One can reproduce only an image on an object that is placed in front of a subject. However, the exhibition can be reenacted, restaged. In this respect, the exhibition is similar to the theatrical mise-en-scène, but with one important difference. In this case, the spectators do not remain in front of the stage, but enter the stage, become participants in the exhibition event. This basic characteristic of the exhibition is relevant also for the internet age, in which the users remain in front of their computers. Indeed, at first glance, it seems that nothing has had changed. We sit in the front of a screen as earlier we sat in front of a book or stood in front of a painting. However, in the context of the internet, the artists and writers have lost their traditional role as form shapers. Instead, they became the content providers. Today, the artists and writers use the means of production and distribution that are prescribed by the internet for the spreading of information. Of course, artists and writers cover the same context as the mainstream media in a somewhat subjective, personalized way, from a perspective that the mainstream media does not take. Or they choose content that is too strange, or on the contrary, too trivial, to be covered by standard journalism. It can be a documentation of forgotten or publicly repressed historical events, but it can also be a situation which was produced by the artists themselves. Action, performances, and processes initiated in a framework of certain artistic practices and then documented by their creators. And it can be completely fictitious. Here, the process of creating fiction becomes part of what which is documented. The cumulative effect of the strategies is not far from the conventions of 19th century realism, where artists combine conventional means of representation with a personalized choice of content along with the subjective interpretations. Avant-garde artists protested against these conventions because they believed them to be purely arbitrary and merely cultural determined. But in the context of the internet, such a revolt makes no sense, because these conventions are inscribed into information technology, or rather the apparatus of the image presentation itself. Indeed, in the context of the internet, the form remains identical for all messages, and thus the content becomes immunized from its absorption by the form. In the context of the internet, a writer never begins with a blank sheet of paper, or an artist with a white canvas. The digital space in which a writer or an artist operates is always already pre-formatted, and the so-called creative act comes too late. One never begins at the beginning. That is why the emergence of the internet was and still is experienced as the end of the avant-garde. And indeed, the avant-garde was driven by the desire to begin at the beginning, at the point zero. And it is precisely point zero that is excluded by the internet technology. Now, a contemporary art exhibition is installed as a room in the white cube. Of course, the white cube always has a certain configuration, but it still provokes a feeling of a new beginning at point zero. After all, the white sheet of paper or white canvas also have a certain shape. In this sense, the exhibition curator, unlike the internet user, maintains the privilege to be a form giver and not merely a content provider. And during recent decades, the contemporary curator has also enjoyed an additional privilege to use not only traditional artworks, but also art documentation of performances, artistic interventions, or long-time artistic projects in the context of the exhibition, including art documentation circulating on the internet. Artworks immediately present themselves as art, so they can be admired, emotionally experienced, analyzed, etc. But art documentation is not art. It merely refers to an art event on exhibition or installation or project that we assume has really taken place. Art documentation refers to art, but is not art. That is why art documentation can be reformatted, rewritten, extended, shortened, etc. One can subject art documentation to all such operations that are forbidden in the case of an artwork, because this operation would change the form of the artwork. The form of the artwork is institutionally secured because only the form guarantees the reproducibility and identity of any specific artwork. On the contrary, documentation can be changed at will because its identity reproducibility is guaranteed by its real external referent and not by its form. Thus, the curator has much more freedom in shaping the form of presented documentation than he or she has in relationship to the traditional art forms. And the curator is also free to combine and juxtapose documentation from different parts of the internet. Contemporary art exhibitions use the documentation circulating on the internet in the same way in which the previously used locally produced art. These exhibitions remove the documents from the original internet sites and combine them in a way that contradicts the usual internet topology. Here again, the removal of the documents from the original sites reveals the hidden apparatus of the internet. The exhibition makes its own framing visible, and thus it also makes visible the internet topology itself. But this selection is also, or at least should be, an anti-selection. It should be transgressive and, most importantly, explicitly directed against the implicit selection on which the regular functioning of the internet is based. The curatorial selection is relevant precisely when it crosses local borders, whether geographical borders or the borders of particular internet groups and chat rooms. Here we encounter a seemingly paradoxical phenomenon of universalist selection. The selection is universalist not when it is all-inclusive. The selection becomes universalist when it reveals the universal practice of framing, the universal apparatus, hidden apparatus, that defines and directs our gaze. And the only way to reveal this apparatus is to remove and relocate the images of objects of our world, in other words, to make an exhibition. In fact, I think I already have spoken 30 minutes, so I can break at this point and you can read the end of my talk at the brochure.